All right. Okay, well, this is the second of our Gallery 51 featured artist series, and I am Erica Wall. I'm the director of the Berkshire Cultural Resource Center here at the Massachusetts College of Liberal Arts. We are so pleased and excited today to have Gerald Sheffield joining us as our featured artist. Hey, Gerald. Uh-oh, we've got to unmute Gerald. Is he there? Are you unmuted?
Am I unmuted? Okay.
There you are. Okay.
Hi, Erica.
Always technical days. Hi, how are you?
I'm doing good. I'm doing okay.
Good. Well, we're so pleased to have you here, and pleased that everyone else who is here is joining us as well. I also want to introduce Veronica Preciado, who's there, and she is our manager of Gallery 51 here at MCLA. So we are going to have another informal conversation with our artists, and just to review how we do this, we are asking you to definitely get involved in the conversation. If you have a question, feel free to send a message through chat to Veronica, and she'd be happy to unmute you if you'd like to ask the question yourself, or if you'd rather that she ask us or ask Gerald, that's fine too. We just really appreciate all of the questions that we get. So let's just jump right into it. Gerald is one of my, if not my favorite artists, and he already knows that, so all of you know that too. I'm really excited to have him here. We have a little bit of history. Gerald is an artist who is out of Yale, and he is now based in Los Angeles. He started his practice there. Now, how long, Gerald, have you been in LA?
Since November.
Okay, so you're practicing in LA right now. And before that, you were on the East Coast.
Yes, I was in New Haven, Connecticut.
Okay, so that's a bit of a difference.
Yeah.
Yeah. Gerald is an amazing artist whose work is actually behind me. So these are two pieces that Gerald created for a show that we did when I was still in California at Gallery 667. And Gerald's going to show you some work that he's been currently doing as well. And I'll give you a little look-see around what else we have here. So I'm just going to jump right into it, Gerald. We're in your studio, so we're looking forward to seeing the work that you've been doing. But I wanted to start off by asking you, just how long have you been practicing? How long have you been practicing artist?
Maybe I would say probably about 7 or 8 years practicing. Okay. I mean, I considered the start of the practice probably as soon as I started undergrad.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. And right now, would you say, how would you describe your practice to someone who wasn't familiar with your work or just wanted to understand what you were doing?
Let's see. I make paintings, and my artwork is about the people and the places I've been and traveled to, and the people I've encountered during my travels. I am interested in sort of these ways that looking at ways that we're connected. Meeting other people and finding common connections.
Right. So tell us a little bit about, I guess let's just start off with what you're doing right now and how this particular body of work started. Would you mind giving us a little tour of your space?
Sure. I'll just take off this dock real quick. Okay. So I guess I'll just start by kind of going over sort of just a general overview of the studio. And then I guess I'll start by saying that this current body of work is influenced by my time in Uzbekistan, where I was there on a Fulbright. And I was researching the architecture and the history and its relationship to the tolerance and the diversity of Central Asia, and thinking of ways that there's these commonalities between Central Asia and just African American life and post-colonial identity formation. So thinking about how these experiences have impacted me, and some of the things that stood out to me that I thought were really significant, and as an African American, something that I thought like all these moments that sort of just kind of like really just stood out, and I was like, okay, you know, this is something that I think is worthwhile sort of making work about. So I didn't make any work while I was there in Uzbekistan, but most of this work came after. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly go through, but then I can go back and stop at each one if you want me to.
Okay.
But I'm just kind of just doing a little overview right now of just showing. And in my practice, I mix drawing and painting. As you see right in front of you, sometimes drawing right onto the canvas, on
Yes.
prime canvas. And I've been trying some different things this time because I'm interested in this layering where it shows the residue of the foundation of the drawing and the image, and then you come back and you see sort of the full image. And I've always been sort of interested in terms of visibility and ways of seeing people who aren't always counted or always shown as part of sort of the canon of art history in terms of representation within contemporary media. Yeah. So I could stop on one. There's a few that are like really like in real work in progress, and I like this one.
Yeah, that one. Let's talk about that one.
Okay.
It's really, yeah, it's really, really amazing.
So it's a diptych. So I just show some, and well, I'll just kind of just go right into it. So this was like one of the last. This is based on a photo. These are some of my colleagues, fellow instructors, but also students that I worked with when I was in Samarkand, which is a historic city in Uzbekistan. It's right there in the middle of the Silk Road. And, you know, this was the first place that I moved around a lot in Uzbekistan, but the first place that I arrived was in Samarkand. And there I was teaching drawing, painting, art history, and I hosted an English language club. So this photo is a reference to that, but I also, you know, one of the things I liked about this too, and why I was inspired to make this painting in particular, was that, you know, every day I went to class, there was such a rich diversity of faces that I had encountered. And, you know, even though everyone was under the umbrella of Uzbek, you know, as a national identity and a cultural identity, there's just so much diversity, and you could see so many different cultures that had, you know, emerged out of Central Asia. And so this is something that I wanted to capture just in this one image. But I thought what was fascinating is in the background, there is this, there is the things that we all know, right? If in Western art history is the classical sculpture. And those were references that were in the institute that I taught. So those are part of the institute within the studio. But this is you know, this is me blocking in a lot of shapes, blocking in certain colors, and you know, as I'm working, I'm still figuring out like what level of resolution. So this is a really early stage of me. You know, you're seeing kind of my thoughts on how much do I want to be in focus, and you know, I'm kind of picking and choosing. I'm making notes. And so there's a lot of mark making where there are notes, there are things that are highlighted, especially in these like high key magenta colors. I'm trying to figure out, you know, what, you know, I'm using drawing and to figure out what I want to, decisions I want to make within painting. And, you know, I think it always for me, it's always challenging these hierarchies within representation. You know, challenging the expectation of what something should be based on, the history and the canon. And so I'm always working within that, and then the visibility of who gets seen and who is seen. So I thought that was, something worthy of showing.
Tell me, it's interesting. I think in your work, I've always been really amazed with the different layers and the subtlety that you create, and it actually requires us to look closely and think deeply. I was wondering about this as a work in progress, like in terms of, I see a lot of similarities in past work. I'm wondering, like, how do you choose your color palette? Is that exactly, like, do you take license when you're looking at a photograph? Is that something, especially like with the really dark blues and hues, is that something that was taken for the photograph? There's something about the way that all comes together in comparison. I know it's a work in progress to what you're going to do, but it's often some of your other work, there's these really dark, deep colors. And I wonder if that's intentional.
Yeah, so I go back and forth between the really deep, dark, and the bright colors. The bright colors, I mean, are some note-taking. I mean, they're just visible sort of note-taking. But the colors here is somewhat a combination of layering for different effects. Also, in the middle, I sort of I've already layered a few because that's where I want to stay with that one. But the other ones are they're still pretty light. I know it's not as visible, but they're really lightly layered. So you could actually see down to the ground on some of them. So, and then I also want to just be transparent and say that, I'm painting over an old painting too. So there is some of the residue of the old painting that's underneath it that's also showing as well. So I was working with that as well. I didn't want to gesso and sand down. I just wanted to kind of work with it. And I mean, I just like having those images kind of pop up as I'm painting over it.
Right. So tell the experience you had during your Fulbright, a lot of the same sorts of themes that it seems like you were exploring in terms of when you talked about, the invisible people, those that are omitted, and you did a lot of that in some of your older work too. I remember an image that you talked about in a work that you did or had painted in South Africa, the same idea and this contrast or comparison between African Americans and South Africans, and then this idea in Uzbekistan.
Yeah.
When you at this point, since it's again like a deeper exploration of it, do you find that you have that you are depicting it differently, or there are different things now that you're doing to help you to convey that idea, different vehicles in your work, because you're staying with painting? So I'm really interested, like, is there something you're like, now I see it this way and this is what I'm trying to do particularly? I know you'd mentioned, we talked a little bit earlier about picking specific moments to depict, but I'm just curious because it's been a continual theme that's really being developed.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good point, Erica. Yeah, I mean, I think at the base of what I'm interested in is embodying this idea that Blackness is more than just on the surface level, and that it translates across like global boundaries and cultural boundaries. And I think if you look, you start to see, especially with post-colonial thoughts on like former colonial occupations and cultures that are dealing with fragmented histories, but also reconstructing their identity from these colonial pasts. There are these very specific like inflections that happen that for me are they are they could be as bright as, you know, Times Square. And I think for me, there are things that happen when a society is regrouping and reestablishing their identity, and the things that we hold on to, the things that we kind of we put in as essential to our culture and carving out our own identities. I think those things are really interesting in the context of not being counted, right? Or not being even seen as a whole person. I think, you know, we're dealing with that right now, right, in the country.
Right.
And so part of it is finding solidarity, you know, anywhere outside. You know, it also just is me looking for something to grab onto that isn't, you know, here. You know, I think here, you know, even at Yale, even at these different institutions, you know, you're still invisible. So I think you can go to the highest point and still not be counted. And I think for me, there's this way that I'm interested in coalition building, you know, from a diplomacy standpoint, that, you know, it's like, well, you know, we can't do this alone. So, you know, I gotta find the help and find the commonalities, because it's not enough here. You know, there's 400 years and it's still not enough here. So, and the world makes sense to me in a way because I served in the military. So the world itself makes sense in a way that this country doesn't, you know? And so I'll go to some other points of things that stand out. So these small paintings, to the second part of your question, the small paintings become these moments where I start to dictate the terms, even though the references are a collage of drawings and photographs. I start to dictate what I want to emphasize and things that I'm reflecting on. Some of them are more allegorical, like, so right here there's a deer, and the deer is kind of like in this really high, bright red, and it's in the middle of a forest. And, you know, the title of it's Young Buck, but it came from a place of reflecting on Black life here in the United States, and kind of considering where this deer is in this precarious situation. It could be in the sight of a hunter, or it could just be in its own. But you kind of sense through the color palette for me that there was this me trying to kind of make this more allegorical statement about the precariousness of this sort of vulnerable life within its own environment, and the presence of it being lost. In the middle, there's this threshold. This is probably one of my favorite paintings. It was a really quick painting to make, but, you know, another part of me applying to the Fulbright was to travel to a region that was right, you know, that the military had engaged in combat with, and also really engaging with a culture that at the time when I applied to the Fulbright, Trump had issued the Muslim ban. So, you know, this was like, it spoke to me in a way that every time we go through these paradigm shifts, there's always a group that gets marginalized and singled out. And so this thing kind of continues to happen. And regardless of how you teach, or I mean, regardless of like what's part of our history, you know, these things just keep happening. And then there's still this outrage. So, you know, so, you know, this is the border of Uzbekistan and Afghanistan. And I had intentions of crossing the border, and I didn't make it across the border. But what did happen was that I was able to see it, you know, and so what I wanted to do was I wanted to project sort of my own anxieties towards crossing the border and what that threshold meant, but also with the reality, you know, it wasn't what I expected it to be. It was actually pretty peaceful. It's a really peaceful border town. And then you could see the mountains on the hills of Afghanistan in the back. And so, you know, it was just like, it kind of disrupts the expectation of what you think, especially by the name, right? If I mention Afghanistan, there's a very specific image I think that people have, and I
Right.
think, and so this is me sort of challenging that, and that's, I'm invested in that as a Black person, is
Mm-hmm.
challenging that expectation of what something is and isn't. Yeah, so and then and then these small moments here too, where it's like, this is a very familiar image and it could be anywhere. And I think
Mm-hmm.
that, I really like that moment, right? And there's a lot of these moments where even with my colleagues, I was like, there's a lot of similarities between Black culture in the United States and Uzbek society. And even even kind of the response to sort of the past with the history of the Soviet Union, and then in the U.S. there are these like overlaps. So and then I thought of the painting here is of a guy smiling and he has these gold teeth, and it was really interesting for me because some of my American colleagues or European colleagues, they were like, why, I don't understand the gold teeth. And I was like, oh, I know that, and it was like, and I was like, I know exactly what that is, and it was like, and there, there's this sort of confusion, and it was like, there's this way there, and this has happened a lot of times where I've traveled, is that I understand something very innately that most of my colleagues probably won't, or just overlook. And so it's really capturing those moments that I think stand out to me, as far as being, there's value in my culture that expands beyond the borders and beyond what may or may not be counted within our own history. So
Mm-hmm.
I like that, and I like the freedom that I have to express myself when I travel and share my own culture in a way that, again, it's like, it's always this, finding these common grounds, and you look across the world, the darker your skin is, the more precarious your survival is as well. So.
Right. So this one is really, it's beautiful. So is this from a sketch or from a photograph?
So it's a combination of things. Jules was is a social media travel influencer.
Okay.
I got the opportunity to meet her in Uzbekistan, and I invited a few people out to the country to kind of create content, but also kind of experience the culture as well. It's a really generous, kind, and hospitable place. Probably one of the most hospitable places I've ever been. And so, I wanted to share that. And I thought that, my experience was just so unique that I couldn't have that alone. So I invited a few Black travel influencers to Uzbekistan. And so she was one of them. I thought what was interesting was sort of the combination of her with the Uzbek dress, and the symbol of the horse, which has a lot of it's a prideful symbol in Uzbekistan. And so I kind of had this juxtaposition of all these images that I think that resonated with me. And this kind of is sprinkled out throughout the work, is my own reflections back on Black life and representation back at home and here in the United States. So these images come from that as well, but also just kind of this essence of Central Asia and the Silk Road being sort of at the intersection of Eastern and Western societies and civilizations, and then sort of those pieces that are picked up in between. But but I originally got inspired to do it, and then I worked in it too fast, and now I'm sort of working my way out of like figuring out some other compositional things that I gotta fix in the image. But yeah, so that came out of that, and then also reconciling with I think past paintings that I've made with the representation of women and kind of reconsidering what that means in that imagery. So there's a lot of symbolism in it for me. But yeah, I mean, I'm open to feedback and suggestions too, of what, I don't want to talk too much my way out of it though, too. So.
Right. The other, as we were going through your space, I know that probably a lot of things that are going through people's minds are the scale that you work at, and then also that you have these other canvases. I see that you have a round canvas, you have a canvas with an arch, you've made some beautiful work in the past, different materials and using that arch shape. Could you talk about those pieces?
Yeah, I mean, they're somewhat directly references to architecture. They're also reference to thresholds or what I consider thresholds or windows into seeing a space. I definitely think that they give context. They definitely change how you see it, whether if it's a square or a tondo. But this is also influenced by art history and working in those that boundary and changing the boundaries and changing the compositions within the boundaries and I actually favor some of the more rectangular canvases more because I just think they do something I think they present another challenge because in my practice, I just love drawing. And so that comes out first. And then there's this tension between drawing and painting that continues to work through. Yeah.
So your practice, you've said that you've been in LA for a relatively short amount of time after coming back from Uzbekistan. You were on the coast before, you came back, and then this pandemic happened.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you're in a space and able to work, but has this quarantine or COVID, this new normal, how has that affected, if at all, your practice?
So at first, I just worked, I'm an introvert, so it was just a natural place for me. It actually gave me a lot more freedom. There was a lot less traffic. I was really careful going to the studio at first. And just like see, you missed a lot, Erica, because there was no traffic on the 101, and so I was just driving through, California free, it was amazing. It was amazing. But I was, it affected my studio discipline in a different way because the first thing I did is I'm really bad at staying connected with a lot of people. And so I made it a priority almost like weekly to reach out to at least 2 or 3 of my colleagues and reach out to everybody and see how everyone's doing. I checked in on my family. The first thing I did was check in on my family. So I think I'm actually a lot more social now. And maybe just being an introvert, I can control the dynamics a little bit. So I feel a little bit more comfortable reaching out to a lot of people, and I think that there's not a lot of pressure for me. I'm just revealing a lot of my own anxieties of feeling stuck in a situation where, it's like I'm asked to perform a lot. So, I have these moments where I can call people. And so during this, it's actually been a way for me to actually reconnect with a lot of my colleagues. When I got back, everybody was busy, and I think for me, it was really interesting to come back from Uzbekistan because the art world was, everyone has said it, but it really was like at a pace that was just incredible. All my friends had everything lined up. So there was not really a great time to meet up with everybody. Everybody has, so this has slowed down a lot of things, and
Right.
it's allowed me to actually have some really good conversations with people. And I'm still like working on that. So that's kind of where it is. The work itself, I just do it. That's some of these, with the exception of these big ones, these were in my living room. So you can, my whole house was full of like canvases. And so, when I moved into the space, I moved in maybe a week or two before the stay-at-home recommendations or stay-at-home orders. So, the big ones are the ones that I actually started working on here in the studio. But, I had paintings just stacked up in my dining room, in my living room. I had drawings all over the walls. And, it's a really stressful thing to do, but that's, maybe we'll get into it later or not, but like, I've been working nomadic for the last like 3 or 4 years. So that's just the way I work. And, in undergrad, I had this really small apartment, and I just made my paintings in my kitchen, and so that's just I've always kind of been without or working with the constraints that I've already had. So, and then when I was in your residency, that was an amazing opportunity, and I really enjoyed that. So I've always kind of, I had those 3 months to just work. So I kind of always have these my own personal sort of residencies for myself. If I can't get into one, I set them for myself in my own with the conditions that I have. So, yeah.
It's amazing. As I said when we started, Gerald and I have a bit of history. I sought him out when he was still at Yale in his MFA program, because I found his work at a show in California, and it's so ironic that we switched coasts, but at least chance to work together, and I had the fortune and the honor of showing your work. But I can definitely attest to the scale of this person's work and how it takes up space. I don't think there were works when he participated in our residency here in North Adams that we could not fit into the house, so they had to stay on the porch. It's a crazy thing, but it's an amazing thing as well. And I'm glad to hear that you're not the only I think we could have a whole session on how artists, many of them, work nomadically. If they're not, they don't have the space or the time to make, that's definitely a conversation in and of itself. But I do think you're not the only person that has mentioned that COVID had this opportunity without distraction. Obviously, the compromise was taking away or canceling all the opportunities that were available or happening, but maybe that's what we all needed to some degree, is a break and time to really to focus. But I can get a total visual of what you're describing, because it was in our living room too, and we loved it. We miss it, actually. But yeah, so we'll have to do a part 2 on that one.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you also, just in relationship to, this huge, it sounds like you've been exceptionally prolific in this short amount of time with the work that you're doing. And I wonder, just for those that are watching, like, for you, are you trying to create a particular body of work that you want to show at some point, or is this just get this out, and whatever happens when it finishes, I will then decide what I would want to do, or just so we can get an idea of how you actually process and think about that when you're creating work?
Yeah, this is less than 1% of, a representation of Uzbekistan. And there's just so much to put down. There's so much to say. And, my partner, Ashanti, she visited me while we were there. And everything I kind of told her, she just couldn't imagine until she got there. And it's a really magical place. I really feel grateful that, in some ways, I always joke that, like, it was self-imposed exile from just the BS that was, that always goes on here. And so what I did was, I really had this opportunity to separate myself and really think about, what matters to me without all these external influences. And, that was also an inspiration for me to invite those Black travelers too, because there's something that happens when you completely don't have those distractions that you think and what you find, what you see and what you create. What I'll say is that I didn't have a lot of time while I was there to make anything. I did a lot of teaching. I traveled a lot. There's a lot of diplomacy that's involved, at least with my program. Each program is different, but there is a lot of diplomacy. So I was traveling and speaking and talking to, a lot of people. I saw a lot of faces. I shaked a lot of hands. I listened to a lot of people. I got invited to a lot of homes. And so, there's just so much that came from that. And I have notes and diaries of everything that I taken in. And this happened with South Africa too, is that it's just too overwhelming to just kind of work in the moment. And there's just so much, let alone just like language cultural barriers and readjusting to a place that I had never been to. It's not in the Western hemisphere. So things are just really different, and that's an understatement, right? And how do I say this? Because there's just so the books that I have on Central Asia are huge, and the people who do the scholarship in this region are a very particular type of, there's a very specific, there's just so many overlapping histories and things that have happened throughout the history of Central Asia and Uzbekistan in general, that there's just so much. So what I did was, this is the manic part of me that, I don't speak much, but when I go into the studio, I just work. I come in here from 7 to 10:30, 11 o'clock, and this is what I do. Because, I speak with my hands, I make things. And so this is my way of communicating a lot of the things that I've seen and reinterpreting. There's mistranslations along the way, and I'm okay with that. But so the other thing is, you have some of my other works, and it ranges. This is the first time that I wanted to I came back and I said, I'm going to give myself a year or two. I started with 2 years and it's like you get back into the rat race and it's like, well, I give myself a year to really stay within the medium of painting and drawing and try to work on a series. I've never worked in a series particularly before. So this is the first time. So it presents some challenges because even though these are from the same influence, each painting does something different. And I'm still trying to get to that point where, I'm not someone who can make 10 of the same images. And I get really bored really quick doing that. So there are all these things. And then the skill itself just is a form of physical exercise for me. It's almost physical therapy to just kind of move these lines across these large surfaces. But I definitely wanted to commit to an actual series. I wanted to see what happened if I stayed with one medium and worked with that for about a year. So that's also where sort of the production is coming from, is I'm not giving myself any other options. I'm only giving myself a few constraints, and then I'm working within that and seeing what comes out of that. If I show, honestly, it's been really freeing to just work and not have any expectations. It would be amazing if these works can be shown. However, I'm learning so much through making them that I've already figured out the next body of work. But like I said, this is only a small part. Every time I talk about Uzbekistan, I remember something else that I'm missing. The bazaar, the invitation is into homes and the conversations that I had that really opened up my experience in Uzbekistan, and really they are opening themselves. And I don't know if that will make it into the painting. There's some things that just are really difficult to translate in like one painting, and you know, it's me trying to go through a series of them. So
yeah. It's amazing to hear, and I'm sure there's no way to really encapsulate what you experienced or all of that into these works. And I suspect that would probably take you even more than a year. So making a year's commitment makes complete sense. I wonder, I'm sure you did, I don't know all the folks that are on this talk, but if anybody has any questions for Gerald about this work, definitely let us know.
oh, there is
Asking you questions.
I mean, I hope she said something. Munisa, she was one of my students in Uzbekistan. I hope she has something to say.
I think we see her. I saw an expression on her face when she saw that group, and I'm wondering, is she in it?
Yeah, she's in it.
Aha!
But I don't know if she wants to speak or not. I hate to put her on the spot, but hey, you guys put me on the spot all the time when I was there. So, you know, it's your turn to speak up. It's your opportunity, Munisa.
Hello, everyone. I'm so glad to see you all and visit your studio virtually. It is really interesting. I observed this sitting and watching these things. So amazing.
Thanks. Do you recognize this?
I think I do. Your hair is down, but are those your glasses in the front row?
I was yeah. It was the time when we had a presentation. And after the presentation, we had this picture.
Okay. All right. Great. That's amazing.
I was so glad.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us all the way from Uzbekistan. I love it. This is so great. And you know, I see I'm looking at participants. I don't want to do any calling out, but don't make me. There's some people I'm going to have to call out on this list.
How can I say? I invited my friends, but I don't know, maybe because of the time.
Yeah. Munisa, your
we
internet.
have it's a line rest, that's why. But I invited all of my friends, and they were they were interested, and they joined it. And I don't know why I don't see them now. But I was so glad to see all of your workings, Gerald. I'm so excited to hear again.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Munisa, for joining us.
Is also this. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead, Erica.
Yeah, no, you go ahead.
So I want to talk about two things. Munisa is an amazing student. I had a personal project, my own version of a thesis that I wanted to work on, which was designing this table that had elements of both African-American culture, but also Uzbek culture. And, you know, I brought the idea up to her as in just kind of like asking, who, there's amazing woodworkers in Uzbekistan and craftsmen in Uzbekistan. And so I asked, her, if she knew of anyone, and she immediately was like, oh, my dad, he's an architect, but he's also a designer and he does woodworking. And so Munisa and I collaborated on a project which we gifted to her institute. And there was this sort of installation, kind of like, I got influence from sort of like Judy Chicago, right? Is this whole idea of like we're all sitting at the table and we all exchange cultures. And so, and that's part of the inspiration for this as well. But
Okay.
I'll say that yeah, I mean, it was great working with her. She's a really smart student, and just really just out there, you know. She's above, you know, beyond, you know, it's incredible. And so yeah, it's just been great having that dialogue with her as well. But I'll say that the inspiration from that came from all of these, you know, I kept trying to do this sort of academic work and get into the archives and doing this very specific research. I had a very specific plan. And one of the things that kept happening was everyone was inviting me into their homes or inviting me to have tea. I was like, I have this work that I have to do, you know, and I kept, you know, and then it was funny because, you know, finally I gave up and I was like, you know what? Okay, cool. You know, and once I actually sat down to have dinner and have tea, you know, everything really started to open up, and everything happens in Uzbekistan at the dinner table. Business happens, you know, the oral history, and, you know, these people are sharing things that I've already read in from scholars, you know, so the oral history there is so rich.
Mhm.
And so there's, you know, this is probably the most unfinished and still at the base level, but it's one of the most important parts of Uzbek society. And so this is like one of those things that I kind of want to bring out more and show more of, just because of the exchange that happens here. And then one thing that also happens is there are customs around the dinner table that I thought were really fascinating, and that everyone shared. Everyone had a very specific way of presenting, you know, of treating guests and hosting that was really specific. And it happened in a lot of the homes that I went to. Almost every home had the same tradition of hosting and greeting. So that's kind of where I just wanted to stop there, and then maybe I can, I don't know, just
Yeah,
get back to.
let's talk a little bit. We've got about 10 more minutes. You know, I'm going to keep asking you questions, but I am going to call some people out because I see Jean Chalasani on this little conference call, and you better say hello. Jean was in residence with Gerald at 36 Chase here in North Adams. And then I'm so glad to see your partner. There she is. Hello, Jean.
Hey.
Reunited and it feels like.
Look at Jean.
Hi, Jean. How are you?
She's muted.
Mute you. Unmute. Go unmute, Jean.
Oh, shoot.
Come on, girl.
Oh, can you hear me now?
Yes. Hi.
Hi. Oh my gosh, Gerald, I'm so proud of you. The work looks so good.
Wow.
Thank you,
I have to say, brief commentary, but these two are like, they're just like a little dynamic duo. They just completely, they fed off of each other, and it's just so nice to see them together again. I have not seen them together since, which has it 2-3 years? My goodness.
2 years.
But
Wow.
both of them have continued to do amazing work. They're flourishing, they're getting acknowledgement, and I am really proud of both of you. And it's just so lovely to see both of you together. So I just had to say hi.
I had to take a screenshot of that real quick.
Yeah, for
Oh,
sure.
gosh.
Screenshot, for sure. It's
Hi, Munissa. I
amazing.
see you too. I see Munissa too. I couldn't see everybody when I was showing everything. But wow, it's so good to see you.
So yeah, so Gerald, you left Jean on the East Coast too. Do you live?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, we still talk. We still share stuff. You know.
Oh, that's
and we
great.
still, yeah, exchange ideas and stuff. So.
That's
Mhm.
wonderful. Okay, Jean, do you have give Gerald a really hard question?
Oh my gosh.
No pressure.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if I have a question, but I'm just really surprised at seeing the amount of work you're doing. Just because I know you spent a lot of time thinking about things before you get to them. So seeing you actually making this large body, it's like really inspiring. I feel like I'm in a transitional period where I'm not making a lot of work right now. So it's, I don't know, it's interesting. I kind of think about back to our residency when you would always come to my studio and be like, oh, you're making work. And I'd be like, what is he talking about? I kind of feel like I'm in your position now where I'm like, oh, he's making work.
Well, you know, that came out of like an envy too, because I had just got out of grad school and it was hard to kind of make work without all those voices in my head. And it was just really good to, I mean, kudos to you too, Erica, for putting us together, for matching us, because it was great to just be completely inspired by your creative freedom, and that energy you had with your work. That yeah, I mean, it was just like when Alex came, you know, we were just so upset. We were just like, man, you're just like working, you know, in the purest form, and it's like you're just doing it, you know. And we just came out of this intense program where, you know, I've been told not to paint, you know, so it's just kind of like, I was like conflicted on like, what do I do, you know? And so, yeah, so it was great to just see you do that. So, yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well,
It's
yeah,
it's interesting, you know, that we've had a lot of conversations with artists, and particularly Genevieve Gaignard while she's here. We talked a lot about, especially in the midst of this quarantine, that it's a little bit more difficult to get that sort of or to sustain the sort of dialogue and criticism between artists in the same way. Despite we have this visual tool, it's not quite the same as being able to walk into your studio and, oh, you know, pick this up. What's this, Gerald? What are you working on? Or what's that? Because it's only relegated to how much you can see on this screen. So I think what you're talking about, it's really interesting that you valued so much being able to just wake up, walk over to someone's studio and say, what are you doing? Or, you know, why are you doing that? And we can't do that right now. But it is a really important part of every artist's career from the beginning to the end, that artists are each other's best supporters, critics, patrons, collectors, all that. And that's definitely interrupted right now. So it's I think that kind of is a testament to what you're talking about. I wonder, you know, I'll ask you two or any other artists or anyone else here right now. Well, I guess you kind of talked about it, Gerald, that this has been in some ways kind of a gift, being an introvert, to be able to just go and be uninterrupted and all that sort of thing. Has anybody else experienced an upshot from this quarantine in some aspect? Jean, you've been too busy making masks for everybody. Too busy, and that's totally okay. But you know, is there anything that anybody has felt, again, kind of like what Gerald said, that has actually been a bit of an opportunity benefit? Of course, this is not the way that you would want it to happen, but anything else anybody has felt? No. Yeah.
What Gerald said, he said something about not having pressure to perform anymore, and I've been feeling like that with quarantine also. Like I don't feel a lot of like fire at my ass right now to make work, because all my shows got canceled, and I kind of see that as a big sigh of relief, because I'm not forcing work anymore. It could just come naturally and come at its own pace. And yeah, so I think Gerald just like, he said that very clearly and like summed up probably how like a lot of artists are feeling too. Like, yeah, like it's nice to not have pressure and to really become connected to yourself again. So, yeah.
That's an interesting point. I think there have been a couple of articles and writers that have, this is what they always do. The two of them just start giggling about something that we don't understand. Anyway, what I found is that a lot of articles have been written about this idea of what the quarantine will actually produce from artists, that we have some of the most amazing work ever that was never intended for something specifically. And that's so so amazing. And that I think it would be interesting to see. I'm sure there's a lot going on in New York, LA, I'm sure, but you know, they've even talked about this in terms of art fairs, that those, what is most important is that regional community now. You can't depend on that sort of global recognition or patron, you know, support that we could have in the past, and what the communities will very much look like after all of this, I think will be very different, but they will be very much local, that we realize that there is a lot to be said, because I think we all are trying to go big or go home, and that's not necessarily the way in which things are going to work from this point out. I have 2 more questions for you, and I have 3 to ask them. The 2 are, what's the most important thing that you think you've learned about your practice at this point? And then what's the one thing you still are very much committed to learning?
Oh, cool. Yeah. So one of the things it's maybe in the last week or 2, I really understood that I'm interested in these, you know, the world is very loud. And for someone like me, I think painting and art, I'm looking for these quiet moments. And you know, there's a lot of loudness in Uzbek society as well. And I realized, like, when even thinking about this talk, I was like, wow, I only have these really quiet moments, and I don't know, you know, what that says, you know, and I don't want that to like be a misread, but I personally, I am interested in very quiet moments. And I think that's even back to like home, right? The first painting you stole of mine, there's a very, even though it's Iraq, right? It's a very quiet moment. So I think that the second part of that, what I'm still learning, or what I'm engaged in learning now, is developing a way of, I mean, I've listened to myself a few times. I don't like the way I sound. So I've been working on, I don't know, just speaking clearly and not, you know, you've heard me, both of you listen to me. I can go on tangents and like, you'd be like, what are you talking about? Just get back to the point.
I enjoy that. I personally like that.
So, you know, I also asked Ashanti, I was like, you know, when I go on that tangent, could you tell me that I'm doing it? Because I want to, you know, but not everyone has the tolerance for that, right? And, you know, especially when you're meeting people, you know, you just need to just kind of say, yeah, I'm Gerald, and that's what you know.
You know, that said, I completely get that. But if there's one thing that I hear continually, and Veronica can attest to this in all these talks, it's what people most, and that's what I most appreciate about you is, and Jean and all the artists that I love and have worked with, is the genuine quality, the authenticity. If that's what you do, that's what you do. If that's how you speak, that's how you speak. I think there's a way to navigate when appropriate, but it's a fine line between that, you know, and I think that that's what makes you who you are. And that is a part, in a way, I think that is a part of your practice, that, you know, the way you discuss your work and how you share it is important. But I think we're all, and especially I will say, artists are they're their worst critics. You always think they're much worse than you are, and you're not doing horribly at all. But I think that's what keeps you motivated. Is there something about you that we should know that we don't know yet?
Personal or professional, or what?
Either one. Remember, this will be placed on a YouTube channel. I don't know, how comfortable do you feel with us here? Do your thing, man.
Yeah. I'll maybe a little bit of both. Actually, something that come up recently that, you know, I'll tell this. My origin story starts really early, before everything. My dad was a security guard at the Atlanta High Museum of Art. So I got to walk through at a very early age the High Museum and see things backstage and see a lot of plays and stuff like that. And then that kind of segued into another thing is, my general interest is that I like theater and I watch a lot of B-movie horror. So that's just what I do in my own time. So
that's cool. I think that's a perfect way to end this. You already hear that? B-movies is where it's at, people.
Yeah.
Sheffield, thank you so much. As I said, we're probably going to have to do a part B of this. Maybe we'll invite Jean and some of our old friends. Jean, thanks for joining us. It was so good to see you. And all of the people who you invited who came with us. Munisa, thank you. I didn't get to see Ashanti, but hi, Ashanti. I know that you're.
Oh, yeah. She's on like multiple phone calls right now.
Oh, wow. This is such a wonderful reunion. You guys just all look so lovely.
Whoa. Like there's a reunion between Ashanti and Munisa as well.
That's so great. I love it. I'm so glad at one point, we all will physically see each other again. We just have to hold tight, but I'm glad that we could at least get together virtually. So thank you so much for your time, Gerald, for joining, for sharing your work with us, and everyone else for coming and spending this time with us. So again, all of Gerald's information is at the Gallery 51 website if you want to know more and get a link to his information. This will be available on the MCLA YouTube. And so we'll look forward to you guys coming back and joining us. I'm sure this will go full cycle and we'll see Gerald again very soon.
Oh yeah, one more sign off. Make sure you hit the like and subscribe button, for all our content.
Tell all your friends. Tell all your friends.
To get all the updates.
Gerald Sheffield, LA-based artist, right now.